Today I fucked up by having sex for the first time in 2.5 years, NSFW. Obligatory, this didn't happen today, rather 3 days ago. I've been single now for 3 years and haven't knocked boots with anyone in at least 2 so, finally fed up with celibacy and buffered by my friend's success story, I joined a dating site. I started talking to this pretty good looking guy. He was a little boring, we didn't have much in common but I figured may as well meet up for a drink and so we did on Thursday evening. He looked exactly as he did on his profile, 6'8" power lifter who looked like a legit Viking, so there was an overwhelming feeling of relief that I hadn't been catfished, but I was pretty sure I didn't want to see him again after about half an hour of chatting. That said, he didn't seem like a murderer and there was a stirring in my loins, so I invited him back to mine. It started well and I was like, fuck yes, let's do this. So I said as much. I also said, you're not going to call me back if we do this, are you? He said he would. He's a liar. So bullet dodged. Anyway, he proceeds to pick me up like I weighed literally nothing, which was exciting TBH because no one else has ever been capable of such a feat. I'm pretty large, and carries me to the bedroom. I'm like stripped because I've gone rabid by this point from the carrying and the dominance. At this juncture, I realize that this guy is completely in proportion if you catch my drift, but I figure babies come out of there so I'm grand. There's a warm-up wristy and a little Spider-Man and then we get down to business. It's over pretty fucking fast, like under a minute, so I open my eyes trying desperately not to look disappointed, and he's just kneeling there with that sorry look on his face. So I'm trying my best to reassure him that 12 seconds is totally enough. Then he looks down and his face goes pale and he asks, have I got a tissue? My first reaction is shit, the condom broke, but nah, it was much worse. Blood? JPEG. So much fucking blood. Well, I know it's not a wild period since I'm not afflicted with that shit. I run to the bathroom, cream carpets, and holy fucking shit. I'm like, get me a bandage or a nappy or some shit. Meanwhile, I've never seen someone get dressed faster in my life. We have a hasty conversation about the first inane bullshit subject that comes to mind and he leaves. I clean up the crime scene, which is my bed, and go to sleep thinking no more of it. Like it'll stop. Nope. Next day is agony and still going. Trying not to do that thing at work where you have to lower yourself into your seat super carefully since a few people know I went on a date and I don't want them thinking I'm some harlot. I'm still optimistic at this point that it'll stop. Wake up Saturday, bleeding is worse than ever, but like fresh, bullet wound type blood. And I felt so sick and dizzy. I'm freaking the fuck out. Obviously can't tell my mum because Catholic shame, so I go to the out of hours doctor by myself on the advice of the 111 lady, who I think thought I had been raped because I was crying so much because I've broken my vagina, and just sit in the waiting room, silently crying whenever I think for too long about how this is probably the last time I'll ever have sex and it wasn't even that good. Mercifully, my body came to keep me company because she's wonderful. Get in to see the doctor. After a very sweet but obviously terrified middle-aged Asian man and 2 nurse practitioners having a good old look, it's determined that I have a pretty substantial tear/graze which is going through a small blood vessel, and because it's on a particularly mobile area of my lady garden, it's unlikely to heal without a little help. Brilliant. There's surgical glue on my vagina. I'm never dating again. Too long didn't read, had sex with a giant Viking powerlifter, ended up getting my vagina skin glued back together. Edit, first, wow. I didn't expect this to blow up like this. Thanks for reading and thanks for the gold to those who gave it. Second, to clarify, a Spider-Man as I meant it is also known as the finger trick, middle and ring fingers in, the rest out, pull up repeatedly, although the Spider-Man version is also great. Hope that helps. Hello favorite community. Locked due to off-topic comments. Thanks for being a wonderful community. You might not have survived more than 12 seconds. Your dirty little peeping Tom of a guardian angel was looking out for you. Now did he finish in 12 seconds? Hulk shouldn't have smashed. Today I fucked up by accidentally spooning with my boss. So this happened about 6 years ago, but a little piece of me died that day and I cringe every time I think about it, so here it goes. So I, 27M, work construction. I'm comfortable with my sexuality, but the trade is inherently very macho and homophobic. Important later. So anyways, I had been looking for work for about half a year and finally landed a job with a local contractor. We seemed to get along fairly well, so I was looking forward to working for him. Well, me being fresh out of trade school, I was naive and had a toolbox chock full of gimmicky tools and apparatus that were supposed to make my life easier, but any veteran tradesman would know is absolutely useless crap. One such example, my tool belt had new and improved hammer loops, which was a partial loop with two little spring-loaded arms. They looked like pinball paddles, so you could just slap the hammer into the loop instead of sliding it in from the top. So amazing. I show up for my first day decked out in my future age carpentry gadgets and about 20 pounds of clothes because it was the dead of winter. After exchanging pleasantries with my new crew, I was shown where I'd be working, 30 feet up on a narrow scaffold plank with my new boss. No biggie. So him and I scale the scaffold and begin working. At some point, my boss needs to get on the other side of me, so I scoot to the edge of the plank and he starts sliding behind me. Click. The front of his belt promptly gets lodged into my fucking hammer holder. Like I said, we were wearing lots of clothes, so it took a minute to see why we were stuck as to balls, and we embarrassingly chuckled before trying to free ourselves. My hammer was in the loop already, so with his part of the belt in there as well, there wasn't enough room for the little arms to fold back and release me from my nightmare. For about 15 minutes we shared that intimate moment on that scaffold, before another coworker came around the corner. After asking what the fuck we were doing, he proceeded to take a wedding's worth of pictures of us while laughing hysterically. I had had enough. I took my pliers and ripped off the arms on the hammer holder. Free at last, we worked the rest of the day in silence. I promptly went home and threw my belt into my wood boiler. If you ever want to break the ice with a new employer, just force them to spoon you on your first day. Too long didn't read. My boss and I got stuck together as to balls on my first day working because of my stupid belt. Edit. It was extremely cold out and the suspenders attached to my belt were under about 3 layers of clothes. The only way to take my belt off was to undress, attached to my boss, on top of a 30 scaffold. Not happening. It may not have been 15 minutes, I didn't get out my stopwatch, but it sure as hell felt longer than that. Edit number 2. The co-worker taking the pics was my boss's stepson, so I'm not about to message him and ask, hey, remember 6 years ago when you caught me and your pa spooning? Mind sending me the pics? Sorry to disappoint. I'm glad I had older guys explain to me early on not to fall for gimmicks. There is so many out there. I had a similar situation happen when my foreman's safety vest got stuck on my face shield halo. Pretty much nuts to forehead. Thank you. That was fucking hilarious. Glad you enjoyed it. How does one boil wood? Lol, it's just a large wood stove with a water jacket around it. Great story. This reminds me of the time I saw my wife, or so I thought, at our gym, walked up behind her and gave her a nice pelvic thrust. Oh lord, it wasn't my wife but another woman that looked just like her from behind. Very awkward. I gave a lady a very enthusiastic double slap at the bar one night. The person I thought it was wouldn't have minded it and thought it was funny. The person it actually was didn't laugh and almost tried to kick my ass. And the state I was in, I probably wouldn't have been able to stop her. Worst thing was 2 of my friends saw this from a short distance, me seeing the ass, me warming my hands up for the double slap, and my final approach, and they said nothing but just looked on waiting for the show. But why didn't you take your tool belt off? It was freezing cold and my suspenders were under about 3 layers of clothes and fixed to my belt, so I would have had to undress. Plus I was on a 16 inches wide plank, so no room to move around. And I'm dumb lol. Today I fucked up. My friend brought her new date over for dinner and I jokingly vetted him in front of everyone by asking if he ever killed anyone. He said yes. As it's often the case, this didn't happen today, but a few years ago when I was maybe 15, young and naive. My mom's best friend back then was V, a young woman in her late 30s, the widow of a really great man that had died a few years earlier, too young, because of a disease. V is a bright, intelligent, well-mannered and good-looking woman. After losing her husband and mourning his death for a long time, she started dating again. She brought to our home a few men over the years. One of those times, V had invited over for dinner a man, let's call him A, who she introduced to us as a good friend. A was a middle-aged man originally from Bosnia. He now lived in my hometown and run his construction business. For those of you not fully aware of Bosnia and the things that happened there, brief history lesson. It's a small country in the Balkans, Eastern Europe, north of Greece, and it used to be part of the former Yugoslavia. Long story short, in the 1990s a civil war broke out there, and things got really, really ugly. Many were murdered, and many fled, including A. That evening, at dinner we were all trying to get to know A better. He seemed a nice, soft-spoken man, mature, and with a lot of experience on his shoulders. We start asking him questions about how long he's been out of Bosnia, etc. I start to think of something witty to say to vet him. Something funny. I asked him if he'd ever killed someone, jokingly. He looked at me, all serious. He said yes. Everyone became silent. He went on to explaining that during the war he had to make some difficult actions a couple of times. There were those situations where it was either his life, and the lives of his beloved ones, or the other person's. He wasn't a soldier, but just a regular civilian looking out for himself. I felt horrible for asking this. When I thought I was just making a joke, I opened up some really painful memories. Things that were not easy for him. Still today, many years later, I can't imagine how he must feel living with such memories. And it was also the first time young me started to realize what war actually is, how it impacts real people around us. After a short moment in which everyone was trying to cope with strong emotions, the dinner slowly went back to normal. We never spoke about that again. Too long didn't read. I thought I'd make a funny joke and ask my friend's date at dinner if he'd ever killed anyone. Turns out, he did during the civil war in former Yugoslavia, to save his and his loved ones' lives. The joke became immediately too serious and thinking about it still makes me uncomfortable to this day. My son did this when we had a Gulf War vet, with terrible PTSD, to our house for Thanksgiving. We were enjoying our meal, and my son asked, "You were in the war. Did you kill people?" Questions you didn't think you needed to tell your children not to ask. Here's a few to ease your pain. My parents divorced when I was younger and a few years after my dad had remarried. We were sitting in the living room with his new wife, my new stepmother, when I noticed a pretty tacky-looking porcelain elephant on a shelf in the corner. I decided to comment on how ugly I thought it was and asked why anyone would display it. Well, that's when my dad informed me that my stepmother had lost her firstborn and his ashes were in that elephant. My stepmother hurried away into their bedroom and I into mine. It has never been discussed again. Bless you. You were 15 and this is the age of asking those kind of questions without knowing the consequence. Look on the good side, it taught you a lot and it's a damn good lesson to learn. 20. Yup, it definitely taught me to try being less funny and snarky. It also opened my eyes as this was the closest I've ever been to a real war, and civil wars like those are the worst. To be honest, I still feel bad today for bringing that up. A and V broke up many years ago, and I've moved to a new country myself, but still bugs me not being able to apologize. It reminds me of when I was an edgy teen and I made a joke to a girl about sexual abuse and she broke down crying. I stopped with the edgy jokes from that day. I was the same around that age. I'll never forget the horror of making what I thought was a simple "your mother" joke to a mutual friend and then learning that their mother had tragically passed away not long before, and oh boy did I feel the guilt. Love a bit of dark humor, but man, have you got to know the person you're potentially saying things to.